South Carolina, 1847. The Beaufort estate stood like a mausoleum above the river marshes, its white columns gleaming like teeth in the moonlight. To the passing traveler, it was a house of prestige and old wealth. But within those walls, neighbors whispered, there were no distinctions between wife, daughter, and possession. A child who was born in that house never really left it. A woman who married into that house never really survived it. And when the youngest daughter of the Beaufort family was seen in town one last time, her eyes blank, her voice trembling, the people of Beaufort stopped speaking her name altogether. This is the story of the Beauforts, a southern dynasty that guarded a secret so grotesque, so unspeakable, that the church itself refused to record their deaths. The Beaufort home was not just a residence. It was a kind of institution, a self-contained kingdom of rules that the outside world could not penetrate. The house kept its own books. The servants were not allowed to leave. Births and deaths were noted in a locked ledger, in handwriting that grew more erratic with each generation. Visitors reported a strange sensation upon entering the parlor. The mirrors were covered in drapes, even in daylight. A smell iron and mildew rose from beneath the floorboards. Children were never seen playing on the lawn. Instead, pale faces pressed against windows at odd hours of the night, as though they were watching something inside the house, not the other way around. And at the center of it all was the patriarch Elias Beaufort, a man whose sermons in the family's private chapel rang louder than the church bells of town. His words carried authority, not because they came from Scripture, but because he had twisted Scripture until it bent around his will. In 1831, a child was born to the Beaufort household. The mother's identity was uncertain. Some whispered it was Elias's young wife. Others whispered it was his oldest daughter. The family did not correct either rumor. The girl was simply called the child. She was raised in silence. Servants claimed she was not permitted to speak until she turned 7. Until then, her cries were muffled behind closed doors. The only sound allowed to escape her room was the lullaby sung by Elias himself, a song with no words, only a droning hum repeated endlessly. When she was finally introduced to the community, the townspeople noted something uncanny. She did not respond when spoken to. She blinked too slowly, as if she had to remember what blinking was. She seemed older than her years, and yet untouched, as though she had not lived a single day outside the confines of the house. By 1846, the child had grown into a young woman. Her name was written in the Beaufort ledger for the first time, Margaret Elias Beaufort, but in the same entry her role was listed twice, daughter, wife. The church refused to recognize the union. No minister would officiate, so Elias held the ceremony in the family's private chapel, where the guests were few and the silence suffocating. Witnesses described a disturbing detail. Margaret did not wear a wedding gown. She wore a child's white dress, too small for her frame, as if she had been sewn into her own past. From that day forward, no one in Beaufort County saw her again. Local rumor has it that the Beaufort family ledger contained more names than ever appeared in public. Infants who were never baptized, women whose graves were never marked. The handwriting in the margins changed suddenly, as if someone else had taken over mid-sentence. Some entries were repeated. Margaret's name appeared not once, but 3 times under daughter, wife, mother. When the ledger was finally recovered after the family's downfall, several pages had been burned away. But what remained revealed something monstrous. Margaret was listed as both the daughter and the wife of Elias Beaufort, and under mother, her own name was written again. She had become her own child. The final record of Margaret was written in 1849. It stated simply, Margaret departed the house, returned at dusk, did not speak, did not eat, buried the next morning. No grave was ever found. No coffin was ever ordered. And yet, weeks later, children playing near the marsh claimed they saw her figure wandering the shoreline, her dress dripping with water, her head turned at an unnatural angle. The town grew silent, and the Beaufort estate became something no one dared approach after dark. The private chapel where Margaret's marriage took place remained sealed long after the family abandoned the estate. When it was finally opened decades later, dust lay thick on the pews, but the altar was disturbingly clean. Fresh scratch marks were etched into the wood, as though someone had clawed at it long after the family was gone. On the walls, faintly visible, were painted words, not scripture, not prayers, but fragments of names. Some appeared backward, others repeated in circles. The name Margaret appeared dozens of times, carved until the wood bled splinters. The Beaufort estate had dozens of servants, but almost none of them lived long enough to speak. Those who did fled the county and never returned. In the rare testimonies preserved in courthouse records, the same refrain appears: the daughter was not allowed to leave the father's side. One woman, a cook named Hester, recalled seeing Margaret rocking in a chair at midnight, humming Elias's wordless lullaby in perfect rhythm. It weren't the child humming, she swore. It was him, through her. She left the estate the next morning and died in poverty, never speaking of it again. When Elias himself died in 1853, the servants did not weep. They burned their uniforms in the yard, yet no one could explain why the sound of a baby crying echoed through the estate for months afterward, long after Margaret was gone. The people of Beaufort did not intervene. They watched from a distance, muttering in taverns, whispering in church pews, but the Beaufort fortune was tied to their survival. The family owned half the cotton mills in the county. They financed the parish school. The sheriff owed them favors. So when Elias paraded Margaret through town in her child's dress, no one spoke. When her body was never buried, no one searched. And when the family ledger surfaced years later, with its impossible entries, the townspeople claimed ignorance. History is written not only by those who commit horrors, but also by those who turn their heads away. By the 1870s, strange reports began to surface. Travelers claimed to hear children's laughter in the marsh near the estate, though no children lived within miles. Hunters described finding small handprints in the mud, prints too perfect, as if pressed deliberately one atop another, forming spirals. One hunter swore he saw a girl in white standing knee-deep in water. When he called to her, she turned, revealing not a face but a mouth sewn shut with black thread. He dropped his rifle and fled. By morning, his hair had turned entirely white. Locals began calling them the children of the marsh. Some believed they were Margaret's unborn offspring. Others claimed they were the servants' children, taken and hidden by the Beauforts. Whatever their origin, no one stayed near the marsh after sundown. In 1889, a historian researching plantation families uncovered the chapel's ledger. It contained names that matched no census record, no parish list. But what disturbed him most was not the names, it was the handwriting. Every entry, spanning nearly 40 years, was in the same hand. The flourishes, the ink pressure, the slant on, changed across decades. Either Elias wrote every entry himself, or Margaret had taken up his hand exactly as if his spirit passed into hers. The historian went blind within months of studying the book. His final journal entry reads, "The ledger writes me now." After the Civil War, the Beaufort estate was rumored to shelter orphans, but those who entered were never seen again. The orphanage registry lists 23 children placed with the Beauforts between 1865 and 1874. Not one appears in later records. Locals said the chapel bells rang on nights when children were delivered, though the bell tower had long since collapsed. The theory whispered among townsfolk was chilling. Elias had built himself a bride out of his own bloodline. Margaret had become both daughter and wife, and now, through the orphans, she was becoming mother of all. When the estate was briefly auctioned in 1891, prospective buyers refused to enter one particular room. The smell was unbearable, sweet, rotting, cloying. The door was nailed shut from the outside. When a carpenter finally pried it open, he reported walls scratched raw, claw marks etched deep into the plaster. A small rocking chair sat in the center of the room, still moving. Beneath it lay a cracked porcelain doll with no eyes. The carpenter quit his trade that same week, claiming he could still hear the chair creaking in his dreams. By the turn of the century, the Beauforts had vanished from polite society. No records of marriages, no births, no public appearances. The name itself became cursed. Land deeds were quietly reassigned, ledgers burned, graves left unmarked. Yet the house remained, Locals swore they saw lanterns glowing in its upper windows even when no one officially lived there. Sometimes they claimed the lantern light moved not like a flame, but like an eye scanning the fields. In 1913, a young theologian named Samuel Corbin arrived in Beaufort County, determined to document the family's true history. He believed the Beauforts represented a case study in corruption of faith, a Southern Gothic parable. But within weeks of studying their papers, he began writing in strange, fragmented prose. The father was the daughter was the wife was the mother, the circle feeds itself, the house is the cradle. Corbin was found in the marsh 6 months later, face down, his pockets filled with small hand-carved dolls. His body bore no wounds, but his mouth was sewn shut. In 1921, townsfolk gathered and attempted to burn the Beaufort estate. They piled lumber and doused the walls in kerosene. Flames consumed the outer shell, but the house refused to collapse. By dawn, the structure stood blackened but unbroken. And from the charred windows, neighbors swore they saw Margaret, still in her child's white dress, rocking in the parlor chair. By 1932, one last Beaufort remained, a reclusive woman identified only as M.E. Beaufort. When questioned by census takers, she gave her age as 77. But the documents describe her face as ageless. Smooth skin, blank eyes, hair black as ink. She spoke little. When asked about her occupation, she simply wrote, "Mother." During World War II, soldiers stationed near the coast claimed the Beaufort estate was haunted. Some reported hearing lullabies at night. Others swore they saw rows of cribs rocking in unison inside the ruined house. One soldier wrote home, "There are no children here, and yet the air is heavy with crying." He died overseas months later. His letter was found folded inside the chapel's ledger, though no one could explain how it arrived there. By 1950, all public records of the Beaufort family had been sealed. Court documents disappeared. Land deeds were rewritten. The estate was marked abandoned and quietly struck from county maps. The church ordered silence. Pastors warned their congregations never to speak the name aloud. Some families, they said, belong to God. Others belong to something older. Yet the marsh remains restless. Locals still claim that on certain nights, a girl in white can be seen standing in the water, her mouth opening and closing silently, as if singing a lullaby no one is allowed to hear. The story of the Beauforts is not written in history books. It survives only in whispers in the empty marsh, in the half-burned bones of a house that refused to die. Margaret Beaufort became the daughter. She became the wife, she became the mother. Her life was not a straight line but a circle, feeding itself endlessly, erasing all distinctions between innocence, devotion, and possession. And perhaps that is the deepest horror, not that one man twisted his family into silence, but that the silence was shared by all who saw and did nothing. The town, the church, the state, they all allowed the circle to close. So if you hear a lullaby with no words carried across the marsh at night, remember, it is not a song, it is a record. The Beaufort family ledger is still being written, and perhaps your name is already in it.